Welcome to Retail Retold, the stories behind how that store landed in your neighborhood. I'm Chris Ressa, in conversation with the people and stories shaping retail and real estate. Brought to you by DLC. Welcome to Retail Retold, everyone. Today I'm joined by Gabe Marans, the Vice Chairman of Stables in New York City. Gabe is a tenant rep broker specializing in the office market. Excited to have him here today. He's got a different perspective than most of the guests. He is super active on LinkedIn. You can follow him there, and soon to be Twitter. We just had an off the line conversation about the exciting real estate conversation on Twitter right now. Welcome to the show, Gabe.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation. And yes, Twitter, watch out. Here I come.
So, Gabe, tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
So it's a pretty one-dimensional story for me. I mean, some people have these Greek tragedies of the ups and downs. I'm New York born and bred. The classic example that I point to as kind of a proof statement to that is I got my first car at 35 after I had moved out to the suburbs. And so I spent my whole life here in the city. And when I was at school at NYU, I wanted to do what everybody else wanted to do at that time, which was go into investment banking, which is what I was planning to do until the firm I had a job lined up for, Bear Stearns, collapsed in dramatic fashion. And so that summer 2008, I ended up interning at Studley, which is now Savills. That was 14 years ago, and I've never left. Our focus here is tenant rep office leasing for the most part, although we do also dip into the other asset classes like industrial, retail, but the whole platform is built and designed around servicing the needs of the tenant. Most of our business is here in the New York metro area, although we've got plenty of clients that are national and even global in nature.
Amazing. First car at 35. Did you know how to drive before that?
I did, yeah. I mean, I was taking my parents' minivan out for joy rides before I had a license. Going way too fast, way too illegally on the GWB. So I did know how to drive. We would rent cars, that kind of thing. But yeah, first car. I mean, that's the benefit of high school and college in the city.
Totally. Did you ever think you were actually going to get to the burbs and leave Manhattan?
It was hard to imagine so, but I knew at some point the appeal of a backyard was going to be too seductive to really turn down. My wife's from Cincinnati, so she grew up with a very large yard in a great suburban house, and so that pull started to fall into place when we had our oldest, Jacob, and too many strollers in too small of a Manhattan apartment just became overwhelming.
Got it. It's too cool. Okay. So office market nationally making a lot of headline news these days. What's going on in New York from an office perspective right now?
So this is where I really relish the unique perspective that our team and our firm really has, which is exclusively on the tenant. Because if I were a landlord and I owned office product, I'd be really scared. If I were a landlord agent and representing buildings and trying to lease them up, I'd be quite terrified because all the data does seem to support the anecdotes, which is it is an ugly market for B commodity space. Now, when we're talking about Hudson Yards, when we're talking about World Trade Center, there's a reason most of those buildings are 90+% leased because we are seeing this continued flight to quality. The big question, though, is what happens to the rest of the 450 million square foot Manhattan office market? What happens to those buildings when you're dealing with 20+% vacancy across the country, when you're dealing with rising burden of debt service, when you're seeing rising vacancy, and what you're starting to see are some landlords hand the keys back to lenders. But from the tenant's perspective, to bring the answer back to your question, it's an amazing opportunity, especially with these economic headwinds, to try to restructure leases, look for creative ways to reduce your spend, to reduce your cost. And landlords are all ears. We're seeing a little bit of a repeat of 08, 09, 2010 vocabulary, where landlords are willing to play ball, and there really are opportunities for tenants to get creative in their cost reduction.
Oh, Gabe, as a landlord, don't love the word restructuring a lease unless it's the other way. But I understand what you're talking about. Let me ask you a question. So that's the opportunist from the tenant side. Let me ask a different question. How do you feel about tenant demand?
Lower, certainly lower than where it was, right? So there are two different parts to answering this question. So I think we have to address this, even though it's an old trope, it's a tired trope. This existential threat of will the office die has been answered. The answer is very clearly no. Office isn't going anywhere. But the other question is, will companies use the economic environment right now to kind of hide behind that in an attempt to reduce their reliance on office space? And I do think that whether malicious or not, many companies are in fact doing that. And some of that is intentional and also kind of goodwill because they're really looking to reduce their overall spend. But if I'm the landlord, and Chris, I'm going to kind of put this right back at you. When we say restructuring, it doesn't mean threatening bankruptcy to bring a landlord to the table. It means trying to frame something as a win-win so that the landlord sees the value in revisiting lease terms in a way that also benefits the tenant. And there are a lot of ways of doing that, depending on the needs of the landlord. But tenants' demand for office space is certainly lower. One simple metric to illustrate this is office using employment in New York City has always been the single best barometer to measure how the office market is doing. And that trend line has inverted itself. So office using employment, we're now well past 2019 levels. But the actual occupancy of office space has stabilized, but has trended below that. Those two lines aren't correlated as closely as they've been for the last several decades. That said, not every office building is built the same, and the ones that invest in themselves, build out amenities, and make themselves attractive to tenants are outperforming the market. The averages exist for a reason.
What a good answer. Let me take a step back. So I think one of the numbers in my head is I didn't realize there was 450 million square feet of office in Manhattan alone. Astonishing. So when you talk about that inversion, New York City, what's the, I guess, least occupancy as far as you can tell today?
In terms of the submarkets, you're really talking about Lower Manhattan. So Lower Manhattan, from a leasing velocity standpoint, is far below historical levels. And that's excluding the top tier product, which again is World Trade Center and several other notable buildings. And a lot of that has to do with just the vintage of those buildings. A lot of them are old, 100-plus-year-old assets. A lot of them are low with dark, maybe one side of light. And that kind of product just isn't really flying off the shelves. When we look at Midtown South, which has historically been a hotbed for creative companies, that market has more or less held itself up. And when we talk about Midtown South, which is Chambers to about 34th Street, it's about the same size market of 80, 90 million square feet as Lower Manhattan. But when we get to Midtown proper, it really can be a tale of 4 or 5 different cities. Hudson Yards doing amazing, reaching really high rents, 150, 160. One Vanderbilt, new construction from SL Green, over $200 a foot. And so you have a lot of great examples of new product that are attracting tenants. But when we think about 6th Avenue, for example, with these commodity 1950, 60, 70 type assets that are mostly indistinguishable from each other, there's going to be a fight to the bottom in order to attract tenants to those buildings. And we're going to be seeing a lot of vacancy as many of those tenants move to Hudson Yards, move to Manhattan West, leaving behind very large pockets of vacancy.
Okay. So like a New Yorker, most people the city is not believe the city is not homogeneous and it's multiple cities in one or multiple neighborhoods. I don't even know, what is like the reported office occupancy in Manhattan right now overall?
I think we're probably, Castle, which we could debate the accuracy of the metric, but most rely on Castle, which I do not. But again, I'm going to cite it right now for comparison's sake. They just reported that we dipped over 50% for the first time since before the pandemic. Now, they normalize that number against 100% occupancy. It is really important for people to understand that at most we were at 70 to 80% full occupancy pre-pandemic. And so we are still well below where we were. But we're not quite as low off the where we should be as most people think, just based on reading that 50% occupancy number.
And that 50% occupancy, that's using the space. That's people coming into the office. That's how many, right? That's not signed leases. How much, right?
Correct.
And what's the least percentage in the city right now? Leased versus vacancy.
In terms of card swipes, or like
no, in terms of like, is the, if the building's 70% occupied, meaning like 70% of the square footage is leased by someone.
Got it. I mean, you have examples of buildings which are essentially zombie buildings that have an excess of 50% vacancy. And the reason why I call them zombie buildings is because landlords are not going to be able to do deals on those buildings, because to do deals within those buildings requires considerable concession packages, including tenant improvement allowances, that lenders are not going to greenlight, because it's just going to undermine the debt service on those buildings. And so they're kind of just sitting there. I know you want me to name specific buildings, but
no, that's fine. You don't have to name specific buildings. What I'm more curious about actually is just what is from a percentage basis, is Manhattan, 80% leased today on average? Is it 75? Is it closer to 90?
Manhattan is about 80% leased. So we have about 20% vacancy.
Okay.
So the balance of the market is 80% leased. New York City tends to be longer term leases, which are 5 to 10 years, sometimes 15, 20 years. And so the groundswell of change that we've observed over the last 3 years is going to take several more years to peter out as some of those leases start to expire. So in other words, the current snapshot of the market doesn't purely capture the impacts of the last few years. We probably won't have a pure picture of that for another, call it 2 to 4 years.
Understood. And when you were talking about the occupancy at 50% and the leased space at 80%, that's the inversion you're talking about, typically, correct?
In many ways, yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Got it. Wild. So, really interesting. Give me the Gabe optimistic view about spaces getting filled in the city over the next decade.
Oh, I don't have to spin this, because it's
there you go.
It's in my heart. So and caveat to everybody listening here, this is going to be very specific to the New York metro area. And I think other markets will really vary based on the appeal of those areas and some of the demographic changes that we've witnessed. But New York City is the United States' only true international city. In terms of what we offer, you can't really draw a line anywhere. From a tenant perspective, we've got everything from nonprofits and government, both international given the UN and also state and local. We're also talking about a huge tech scene, which didn't exist 20 years ago. Of course, legal and financial and everything in between. And so for college graduates from across the country, New York City continues to be the place that they go to pursue their dreams. And when we look at those demographic changes, yes, New York State has experienced some brain drain with people moving to other places, but New York City has not. Our population has actually grown since before the pandemic. And when we look at Manhattan itself, Manhattan is the compromised location. It's a great place to go to if you're in New Jersey, if you're in Long Island, if you're in Brooklyn, or if you're in Westchester. So that's why Manhattan isn't going to go anywhere. And in addition, under Mayor Bloomberg, we started to heavily invest in bringing additional places of higher education to our area. So Cornell Tech is another great example of our investment in the future of New York City. And so when we look at the labor depth and profile, there's no other place in this country, arguably in the world, that is as diverse and as talented as New York City. And so at a certain point, the values are going to reach an equilibrium when people realize, and this is the second part of the question, that human nature requires in-person interaction. It's been the case for millennia, and it's not going to stop just because of a pandemic. And I know that personally, and I can't speak for everybody, and I know that there are other folks out there that do feel like they work better in isolation or from a remote perspective. That's not my experience, nor do I think that that's the mainstream experience. And so this need to be together, to be social, to collaborate in person, to have that emotional connection is going to require working in person, and that's going to require having space in New York City. The part that's missing is this hangover from the pandemic, as well as the lack of investment in many of these assets in order to bring them up to a standard that will make it enjoyable for people to work in those buildings.
Are you sure you're not running for political office, Gabe?
Sometimes when we're fighting bitterly, my wife accuses me of the same thing.
I think you might be. What a incredible little pitch on New York City, everyone. I think one of the stats, quite candidly, I did not know this. New York City's population is up over pre-pandemic.
That's right. Yep.
You want a good LinkedIn post, and I won't steal it for you if you put it up all in the next week. If you put in the 2023 New York City population versus 2019 and just put that up, I think that'll, and you put something snarky like, hey, everybody down south, I know you thought New York City was, a thing of the past. Check this out. You'll go viral. I don't think people really know that.
I don't think people realize that because when they look at office occupancy, they say, oh, New York is trailing Miami or Dallas or Atlanta or Nashville. And that is true. But when you think about the benefits of remote work, it's because people want to live somewhere where they could play. And New York City has got a playground everywhere, the best food in the world, the best entertainment in the world. It's a 24-hour city, and we don't even have a casino yet. And so when you think about that, if you were going to want to move somewhere, why not move to New York? And we saw a lot of that over the pandemic.
Unbelievable. I think this episode is going to get a lot of listens. Okay, Gabe, you've done a lot of deals in New York City. You've got a story about a tech company in New York City. Why don't you give us who are they and where are we going?
All right, this is a good one here. So Chris, everybody else strap in because it gets a little technical. But first of all, the who, what, when, where, why. So the who is Twilio, publicly traded tech company. The when started before the pandemic, but it all kind of came to a head during the pandemic. And the why is because of the collapse of a coworking provider known as Knotel. And so for those of you who are familiar, running up from about 2012 until about 2019, Knotel styled itself as a primary competitor to WeWork, but through various different mistakes, either proven or theoretical, they ended up collapsing. And so we had put Twilio into a full 40,000 foot floor in a lower Manhattan building. And we had negotiated this great deal where they had rights to expand and where all the furniture was provided and the wiring was covered. And it was an amazing CapEx sensitive deal for this growing tech company that wanted to conserve their cash in order to help them grow faster. And so what happens as Knotel starts to collapse? Well, Knotel collapses and Twilio is kind of in the gray area. They're occupying space, but their agreement was not directly with the landlord, who is and was Savannah. And so what we did essentially over the course of 12 hours, although really from start to finish, it was 36 hours, we were able to hammer out a direct agreement with Savannah that preserved all of the goodies that we had initially negotiated for Twilio with Knotel, including getting all the furniture, retaining all of their options. But the big kicker is because of the profit margin that Knotel had built in, we were able to reduce Twilio's spend by 50% and lock in their per square foot rate at a number that was below what they were paying. And so to kind of summarize the major takeaway here, we were able to get them more flexibility at half the rent at no cost to them because of the unfortunate demise of a co-working provider.
In 36 hours.
In essentially 36 hours.
So I think this is an interesting piece that we haven't talked about a lot on this, and I don't think it was made headline news a lot. At the end of the day, co-working is leasing a large space and then subleasing smaller spaces out to other people. They essentially say, I can put some things into this, bells and whistles, operate it better, and therefore I can charge a higher rent, and I'll get a higher rent than the guy who actually owns this building, or the woman who owns this building, or company who owns the building. And what I think you bring up an interesting point generally is, while they may be more CapEx friendly because they've got these fresh new spaces they've invested in with a lot of sharing of things, and they provide the flexible lease terms, in general, in order to make it work, they're going to have to charge more than the landlord otherwise would, because they're leasing from the landlord. That's where their profit margin is. I bet you that while, and this is not a knock on you, they made a deal with Twilio directly, and it was less than Twilio was paying Notel. I bet it was more than they were getting from Notel.
So interestingly enough, it was not. It was
It
lower.
wasn't?
It was lower than that, and so
Okay.
So there are several different reasons why.
But you could see a scenario where it would be.
Oftentimes it's the case, but just
Okay.
because of the timing. So your
Got it.
logic is 100% right. The difference is Notel had signed their deal pre-pandemic. We negotiated our deal in the middle of the pandemic.
Got
There
it.
was no leasing velocity in the market, and so we were able to leverage that at the full expense of the landlord.
Let me ask you, for cash tenants who are more focused on occupancy cost versus upfront cost, do you recommend that they go to non-co-working spaces because the rent on a per square foot basis will probably be higher if they're willing to invest?
So I think that there are a lot of reasons why companies decide on co-working or flex or serviced office, call it what you want, versus traditional space. If all you're looking to do is save on CapEx, then there are going to be a lot of subleases on the market that should be evaluated in addition to serviced office and flex. There are also deals that are in landlords' buildings that are built. So I did another deal for a company who I won't mention because we're active right now in the market for them. It was also a Notel deal. Notel went bust. They handed the keys back to the landlord. It was fully furnished and wired. And we did a direct 1-year deal at market rents with that landlord. And so the only difference, nuance in that story is that they were not a pre-existing Notel tenant. So yes, the CapEx sensitivity is pretty important. But I think the most important evaluation metric when deciding which path to follow is lease term. And so if you need to retain flexibility to decide whether you're going to grow or shrink, go in the direction of serviced office, flex, and or short-term subleases. Traditional leases generally require longer term because the landlords are amortizing the deal costs over a longer period of time. And so if you have the ability to entertain a longer lease term, or you have certainty about your headcount moving forward, then certainly on a per square foot basis, it is more cost effective to sign a traditional lease and build the space out, furnish it yourself.
I think that's something that little piece there is just doesn't make headline news ever. And if you're in real estate, I think it's logical to understand that. But if you're not and you're just reading headline news, I don't think people outside of our space in commercial real estate, whether you're in office or retail, kind of grasp that concept. As a landlord, we don't have a co-working space, but one of the things like you think about is you're leasing to this group. In order for them to make it work, they need to get more rent than I'm charging them. And so that they're pretty confident in their model that they think, and some of these owners have owned these buildings for a long time. And yes, there's the part of they need to innovate, and maybe some people haven't, but they still know real estate pretty good and how the market works. And so it's an interesting thing that's happened. Anyway.
Yeah, and I'll only add that your view is 100% right. That's why you've seen this migration away from this buy wholesale, sell retail version of flex and more towards management agreements.
Sure, that makes a lot more sense.
Seen like the rollout of landlord-owned products like Tishman Speyer, the Durst organization, Silverstein, because there's this recognition that there is this desire and need in the marketplace. But whether we like it or not, the current providers in the market aren't meeting that level. There was just news today that Industrious is signing a consulting and management agreement with Nuveen. And so you're going to see more and more of these stories where landlords see the value and want to capture some of that upside and aren't willing to take on the risk of signing a long-term lease with a flex provider.
Yeah, and if you're the flex provider, you're signing a long-term lease with a liability, and your income streams are on a short-term basis, which is a risky proposition in itself. So
it's easy to see how brilliant Adam Newman is in the 10 years that he's lived in a rising market. It's when things aren't rising that really requires a closer look at the business model.
Sure. Well, the Twilio story is fascinating. I am curious. You've probably gone through the lease negotiation that's taken, over a year. How do you get it done in 36 hours? One, you needed two willing participants, because where attorneys didn't get involved and just back and forth, red line, red line, red line, red line. How do you make that happen?
Yeah, so there have been a few instances where we saw some of these deals get done. It hurts me to say this, but you need a healthy dose of fear that applies to both parties in order to keep them focused on the deal at hand. And in this case, it was the lack of an utter agreement between two parties. Twilio had no legal agreement with Savannah to stay in place, and Savannah had no legal agreement to collect rent from Twilio. And there was also a lot of background noise about potential legal action with Notel and their new acquirer, Newmark. And so there was this desire to clarify the situation that encouraged everybody to move rather quickly. There are other environments that I've lived through that have also mimicked this. You saw Hurricane Sandy take out a lot of buildings downtown. A lot of those companies ended up signing leases for temporary space elsewhere in Manhattan. Those deals came together very quickly. We saw the same thing after 9/11 with companies migrating from lower Manhattan to other parts of Manhattan. And so you really need extenuating circumstances plus a healthy dose of fear in order to bring that together. I've been part of other deals that have happened over also hours, but not quite 36 hours. I've seen 72-hour deals come together before, but the Twilio deal was rather unique in terms of the speed.
I got a lot of quotes that I'm going to be quoting you on LinkedIn, and tagging you from this.
And Twitter, Chris, right?
And Twitter. Extenuating circumstances and a healthy dose of fear. That's how you get deals done quickly. Because let's go to the reality. You have a tenant. They engage you that they want to see, that they're interested in being in Manhattan. How long before you sign a lease with that tenant?
So the fastest I've ever done it is 30 days.
Okay.
From start to finish.
What's the normal in New York right now?
I think you're probably talking about, so when we talk about starting a process for your average size tenant, which I'm going to say 5 to 20,000 feet, you're talking about 6 to 12 months. When you get north of 20,000 feet and start to approach 100 or 100 plus, there are more complications involved with it, less common for you to find built space that you could slide right into. And so you're planning for construction contingency. That's really the major block. And so in this market, you're seeing construction take 6 months, sometimes longer, plus time for design. And so at a minimum, we're talking about 6 months to get started. For larger deals, you're talking about closer to 24 months. It can be done. That 30-day deal happened because we found built space that they were able to slide right into. And as I said before, it was extenuating circumstances with a healthy dose of fear.
Extenuating circumstances with a healthy dose of fear. Okay, Gabe, this was great. I really appreciate the time today. I'll let you know when this comes out, but really appreciate you coming on. What a education for me, and I think the audience of Retail Retold, to get the office perspective, in particular, the New York City office perspective. So everyone check out Gabe on LinkedIn. He puts out some really cool content. And thanks for coming on, Gabe.
All right. Appreciate it, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate you watching. Hit subscribe. See you in the next one.